The morning sun filtered through the oak trees lining Maple Ridge Drive, casting dappled shadows across the pristine sidewalks of our planned community. It was one of those perfect early summer Saturdays where the temperature hadn't yet climbed 2 uncomfortable levels, and the whole neighborhood seemed to wake up with extra energy. I stood in our driveway, coffee mug in hand, watching my 8-year-old daughter Emma practice her cycling skills on the quiet residential street. Emma had just gotten her training wheels removed 2 weeks earlier, and she was absolutely thriving. Her blonde ponytail bounced with each pedal stroke as she navigated the gentle curve of our cul-de-sac. Her face lit up with pure joy. She'd circle around, ring her little bell, wave at me enthusiastically, and start another lap. It was the kind of scene that made you grateful for suburban life. For safe streets and friendly neighbors, our neighborhood, Riverside Oaks, HOA, was the kind of place real estate agents described as family-friendly and community. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained common areas, a community pool, and playground. We'd moved here 3 years ago specifically because we wanted Emma to grow up somewhere she could ride her bike safely, make friends with neighborhood kids, and experience the kind of childhood I'd had growing up. The HOA had its quirks, of course. Monthly newsletters with reminders about acceptable mailbox colors. Quarterly meetings where people debated the merits of different mulch varieties for the common areas. The occasional complaint about someone's grass being a quarter-inch too long, but overall, it seemed like a reasonable price to pay for living in such a well-kept community. That morning, several neighbors were out enjoying the weather. The Johnsons were washing their car 2 houses down. Mr. Patel was trimming his hedges across the street, waving occasionally when Emma rode past. The Morrison kids were drawing with sidewalk chalk in their driveway. It was peak suburban tranquility, the kind of morning you'd see in a commercial for minivans or family vacation packages. I'd noticed the white Lexus SUV earlier, driving slowly through the neighborhood. It had passed by once, then circled back, which struck me as slightly odd but not alarming. Lots of people drove slowly. Here the speed limit was 15 miles per hour. Strictly enforced by those radar signs that display your speed. The HOA had installed them after a petition. When a roundabout traffic safety. Emma had just completed her 5th or 6th lap and was gaining confidence, even taking her hands off the handlebars for a few seconds at a time, something that made my heart skip a beat even though she was wearing her helmet and pads. I'd just taken another sip of coffee when I heard the SUV's engine rev slightly. The white Lexus had pulled to the side of the road about 50 feet ahead of where Emma was riding. I watched as the driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. I recognized her immediately, though we'd never been formally introduced. Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, mid-50s, always impeccably dressed, known throughout the neighborhood for her zealous enforcement of community rules and her tendency to send violation notices for the most minor infractions. Patricia had a reputation. In the 3 years we'd lived here, I'd heard countless stories. She'd reported the Thomases for having their garbage cans visible from the street for hours past the designated collection time. She'd sent a formal complaint to the Architectural Review Committee when the Chuns painted their front door a shade of red that was apparently not on the pre-approved color palette. She'd even called a special HOA meeting to discuss a neighbor's garden gnome, arguing it violated the community's aesthetic standards. My wife Seda had dubbed Patricia Hakaran after our first run-in with her 6 months ago, when we'd received a sternly worded letter about our mailbox needing repainting. The mailbox looked fine to us, but Patricia had included photographs highlighting visible weathering inconsistent with community standards. We'd repainted it to avoid further drama. But Patricia had never been aggressive. Annoyed, certainly. Overzealous, absolutely. But aggressive, no. She was known for her passive-aggressive notes and her ability to quote HOA bylaws chapter and verse, not for physical confrontation. That's why what happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing quickly enough to make sense of it. Patricia stepped into the street directly in Emma's path. My daughter was about 30 feet away, pedaling steadily, probably going 8 or 9 miles per hour. I saw Patricia raise her hand in a stop gesture, like a crossing guard halting traffic. "Young lady, stop right there," Patricia's voice carried clearly across the quiet morning air. Emma, startled by the sudden appearance of an adult in her path, did what any 8-year-old would do. She panicked slightly. She squeezed her brakes, but she was still learning, still getting used to the bike without training wheels. The bike wobbled. What Patricia did next would replay in my mind for weeks afterward. Instead of stepping aside, instead of letting Emma coast to a safe stop, Patricia actually moved forward. She reached out, seemingly trying to grab the bike's handlebars, and made direct contact with Emma. The force wasn't dramatic. Patricia wasn't a large woman, but it was enough. Emma's bike tipped sideways. My daughter, my little girl, who'd been so proud of riding without training wheels, tumbled onto the pavement. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the driveway as I broke into a run. The Morrison kids stopped their chalk drawing. Mr. Patel's hedge trimmer went quiet. The Johnsons' car washing ceased mid-sponge. Every neighbor within sight turned to look at the scene unfolding in the middle of our quiet residential street, and Patricia Hendricks stood there, hands still, outstretched, looking down at my crying daughter sprawled on the asphalt. I've never moved faster in my life. The 20 yards between our driveway and where Emma lay on the street seemed to stretch impossibly long. Yet I covered the distance in what felt like both an instant and an eternity. My heart hammered in my chest as I heard Emma's Krishna screams of agony, thankfully, but the frightened, hurt sobs of a child who'd just experienced something shocking and painful. Emma, Beatty, are you okay? I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands already checking her over for injuries. Her left knee was scraped, blood beginning to well up from the road rash. Her right palm had similar abrasions where she'd tried to catch herself, but she was moving everything, crying in a way that suggested she was more scared than seriously injured. Dodgy, she pushed me. Emma sobbed, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks. I was just riding and she pushed me. By this point, Mr. Patel had jogged over from across the street. The Johnsons were approaching quickly. I could see Mrs. Morrison already on her phone, likely calling 911 or her husband. The whole neighborhood was mobilizing around us down in Patrice. Hendricks stood there, her expression shifting from shock to something that looked uncomfortably like indignation. Now see here, Patricia began, her voice taking on that authoritative tone I'd heard her use at HOA meetings. This child was violating community bylaws. I was simply trying to prevent you knocked my daughter off her bike. I cut her off, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. I was still kneeling beside Emma, who was clinging to my arm. What the hell were you thinking? I did no such thing, Patricia snapped back, drawing herself up to her full height. She was wearing press khakis and a polo shirt with the Riverside Oaks HOA logo embroidered on it, as if she were on official business. I attempted to stop a clear violation of the community rules. This child was riding unsupervised, and according to Section 7, Subsection 3 of the HOA bylaws, children under the age of 10 must be accompanied by an adult when I'm her father. I was right there. I gestured toward our driveway, where my shattered coffee mug lay in pieces. I was watching her the entire time, and even if there were some rule which is ridiculous, you don't physically grab at a moving bicycle. Mr. Patel knelt down beside Emma. Let me see, sweetie, he said gently. Mr. Patel was a pediatrician, and I felt grateful for his presence. He examined Emma's scrapes with professional calm. These need to be cleaned and bandaged, but she's going to be fine. No broken bones, just some abrasions. I want Mommy, Emma whimpered, and my heart broke a little. Sarah was at her Saturday morning yoga class. Blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding, Patricia was still talking, seemingly unable to stop herself. The bylaws are very clear, and as HOA president, I have both the right and the responsibility to enforce them. Children have been riding recklessly through this neighborhood for months, and I've received multiple complaints from residents about near misses and safety concerns. Someone needed to take action. So, you decided to knock an 8-year-old off her bike. Mrs. Johnson had arrived, and she was staring at Patricia with undisguised disbelief. Patricia, what on earth possessed you? I didn't knock her off. Patricia's voice was rising now, defensive. She was already wobbling. I simply tried to stop her before she hurt herself or damaged property. If anything, this proves exactly why we need stricter enforcement of the cycling rules. I carefully helped Emma to her feet, keeping her close to my side. Her bike lay on its side a few feet away, the front wheels still slowly spinning. She was putting weight on both legs, which was a relief, but she was shaking slightly. I've got everything on video? A voice called out. We all turned to see Jason Morrison jogging toward us, phone in hand. My Ring doorbell caught the whole thing. I could share it with whoever needs it. Patricia's face went pale, then flushed red. That won't be necessary, because this is clearly a misunderstanding that can be resolved within the community. There's no need to involve outside authorities or make this into something it's not. A misunderstanding. I felt my anger rising again, hot and protective. You physically interfered with my daughter while she was riding her bike on a public street. She has injuries. There are multiple witnesses. This isn't a misunderstanding. Patricia, this is assault. How dare you? Patricia sputtered. I am the president of this HOA. I was acting in my official capacity to maintain community standards and safety. I will not be threatened or accused of criminal behavior for doing my duty. Your duty? Mr. Patel stood up, and there was steel in his voice I'd never heard before. Your duty is to oversee architectural reviews and organize community events, not to physically accost children on public streets. More neighbors were gathering now. The crowd had grown to at least 15 people, all of them having witnessed or heard about what happened. I could see phones out, some recording, others texting. The neighborhood grapevine would be on fire within the hour. Mrs. Morrison arrived with a first aid kit. Let's get these scrapes cleaned up. Honey, she said to Emma, her voice gentle. She shot Patricia a look that could have frozen lava. I cannot believe what I just saw. Patricia looked around at the assembled neighbors, seeming to realize for the first time that she didn't have a single person on her side. The usual deference people showed to the HOA president was completely absent. Instead, There was shock, anger, and disgust on every face. "This is absurd," Patricia declared. But her voice wavered slightly. "I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting. This vigilante parenting? This flagrant disregard for community rules? It cannot continue. You people have no idea what it takes to maintain property values and community standards. Get away from my daughter," I said quietly, but with unmistakable finality, "and stay away from my family." Sarah arrived home 20 minutes later to find our living room transformed into a crisis command center. Emma sat on the couch, her scraped knee and palm now properly bandaged by Mrs. Morrison, who'd insisted on staying to help. Mr. Patel had also remained, wanting to make sure Emma didn't show any delayed signs of injury. Jason Morrison had emailed me the Ring doorbell footage, and I'd watched it 3 times, each viewing making me angrier than the last. "What happened?" Sarah dropped her yoga mat and rushed to Emma, who immediately burst into fresh tears and launched into a rapid-fire explanation, involving the mean HOA lady, and she pushed me. "Mommy, she really pushed me." I filled Sarah in on the details while she held Emma close, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to fury. When I showed her the video footage, her hand flew to her mouth. The footage was damning, crystal clear. It showed Emma riding normally, no wobbling, no recklessness. It showed Patricia stepping into the street deliberately. It showed Patricia reaching out and making contact with both Emma and the bike. There was no way to interpret it as anything other than what it was: an adult woman physically interfering with a child on a bicycle. "I'm calling the police," Sarah said flatly. "Sarah, let's think about this," Mr. Patel interjected gently. "I'm not saying don't involve authorities, but let's make sure Emma's okay first. She's had a shock." Over the next hour, our house became the epicenter of neighborhood activity. Neighbors stopped by in a steady stream, some bringing ice cream for Emma, others wanting to express their outrage, several offering to serve as witnesses if we decided to press charges. The consensus was universal. Patricia had gone too far. The Chuns told us about the time Patricia had called code enforcement on their teenage son for skateboarding in their own driveway. The Thomases recounted how she'd threatened to fine them when their grass got slightly overgrown during their family vacation. Story after story emerged of Patricia's increasingly authoritarian behavior over the past 2 years. "She's gotten worse since she became president," Mr. Johnson said, shaking his head. "The power's gone to her head. But this physically touching someone's child, that's beyond the pale." Sarah had indeed called the police, and an officer arrived that afternoon to take our statement. Officer Rodriguez was professional and thorough, interviewing us, examining Emma's injuries, watching the ring footage multiple times, and taking statements from the witnesses who were still present. "This is definitely assault," Officer Rodriguez confirmed, "batterized technically, since there was physical contact. The question is whether you want to press charges." Sarah and I exchanged looks. Did we want to criminally charge our HOA president? It seemed extreme, yet watching that video of Patricia knocking Emma down made my blood boil. "Can we have some time to think about it?" I asked. "Of course. You have a while to decide. In the meantime, I'm going to have a conversation with Ms. Hendricks." Officer Rodriguez's expression suggested this wouldn't be a pleasant conversation for Patricia. By evening, our doorbell rang again. This time it was David Chung and Margaret Thomas, both members of the HOA board. "We need to talk," David said, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Can we come in?" We settled in the dining room while Emma watched a movie in the living room, finally calmed down and distracted. "The board held an emergency meeting this afternoon," Margaret began, "without Patricia, obviously. We've received calls from at least 30 homeowners about what happened. The ring footage has been shared in the neighborhood Facebook group, and we've learned that this isn't an isolated incident of Patricia overstepping." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. David pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a long email thread. "We've been getting complaints about Patricia's behavior for months, but they were isolated enough that we didn't see the pattern. Aggressive confrontations about minor violations, showing up at people's homes unannounced to measure their grass height, threatening homeowners with legal action over trivial matters. She told the Parkers she'd sue them personally if they didn't remove their bird feeder because it attracted pests." Margaret added, "She's been conducting what amounts to a reign of terror, and we board members have been too to address it properly." "What happens now?" I asked. "The board has voted unanimously minus Patricia, who wasn't present, to request her immediate resignation as president," David said. "We're also suspending all of her HOA privileges pending a full review of her actions. If she refuses to resign, we'll hold a special election to remove her. And if she won't step down voluntarily," Sarah's voice was hard. Margaret met her eyes. "Then we'll remove her by force of the bylaws. What she did today was unconscionable. She doesn't represent our community values. More than that," David added, "we want you to know that the HOA will cover any medical expenses Emma incurred, and we're formally apologizing on behalf of the organization. This should never have happened." After they left, Sarah and I sat in silence for a long moment. I still want to press charges, Sarah said finally. Not for revenge, but because what she did was criminal. If she did this to Emma, who's to say she won't escalate with someone else? I nodded slowly. I think you're right. And honestly, the video speaks for itself. A judge or jury would see exactly what happened. That night, after Emma was asleep, I checked the neighborhood Facebook group. The post with the ring footage had over 200 comments and had been shared dozens of times. The overwhelming sentiment was support for our family and calls for Patricia's removal from the HOA board. But there were a few comments defending Patricia, claiming she'd been trying to prevent an accident, suggesting we were overreacting. Those comments were quickly drowned out by others, but they reminded me that even with clear evidence, some people would find ways to justify the untrue. The following week brought developments I never could have anticipated when I'd started that peaceful Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and my daughter riding her bike. Patricia Hendricks hired a lawyer of FACA that became public knowledge. When we received a cease and desist letter demanding, we removed the ring footage from social media and refrained from defamatory statements about her character. The irony that we hadn't posted the footage publicly ourselves, and that it had been shared by other neighbors, seemed lost on her legal team. Our lawyer, recommended by Mr. Patel, reviewed the cease and desist and laughed. This is toothless, he said. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and you have video evidence. More importantly, they're trying to intimidate you into not pressing charges. We pressed charges anyway. Battery against a minor, the prosecutor's office confirmed. Given the video evidence and multiple witnesses, it was about as clear-cut as these cases got. The HOA held their special election 3 days later. Patricia refused to resign, necessitating a vote. The results were devastating for her. 127 homeowners voted for her removal, with only 8 voting for her to remain as president. The meeting itself, according to neighbors who attended, was extraordinary. Patricia showed up with her lawyer and attempted to defend her actions by reading increasingly obscure HOA bylaws about bicycle safety and parental supervision. She actually argued that she was protecting the community from potential liability if Emma had crashed and injured herself. Mrs. Chun told us afterward. She claimed she was preventing a lawsuit. The lawyer tried to get her to stop talking, but she wouldn't. It was painful to watch. David Chun was elected as the new HOA president by acclamation. His first official act was to propose a complete review and revision of the community bylaws, with a focus on removing overly restrictive rules and clarifying that HOA authority did not extend to physically interfering with residents or their children. Emma recovered quickly, the way resilient children do. Her physical injuries healed within a week. The emotional impact took longer. She was nervous about riding her bike for several days, worried that the mean lady might come back. Sarah and I took turns riding with her, rebuilding her confidence. Mr. Patel's kids, who were teenagers, made a point of stopping by to admire her bike and tell her what a good rider she was. The neighborhood rallied around us in ways that reminded me why we'd wanted to live in a close-knit community in the first place. The Morrisons organized a kids' bike safety day that was really just an excuse to let children ride their bikes freely while adults grilled burgers and socialized. It became an impromptu celebration of community, the real kind, based on mutual support and kindness, not on enforcing arbitrary rules about mailbox colors. Patricia's criminal case moved through the system with surprising speed. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal, a misdemeanor battery charge, probation, community service, and mandatory anger management classes. She was also ordered to stay at least 100 yards away from our family and to have no contact with Emma. Case was settled out of court. Patricia's homeowner's insurance covered a settlement that included Emma's medical expenses, minimal though they were, compensation for emotional distress, and our legal fees. The amount was enough to fully fund Emma's college savings account. Patricia also had to write a formal letter of apology, though it was clearly drafted by her lawyer and contained more passive voice than genuine contrition. The most significant consequence, perhaps, was social. Patricia became a pariah in the neighborhood. Several families who'd been on the receiving end of her HOA tyranny filed formal complaints with the board about her past behavior. The pattern that emerged was troubling: escalating aggression, inability to distinguish between meaningful safety issues and personal preferences, and a profound belief that her position as HOA president gave her authority she simply didn't have. Eventually moved out of Riverside Oaks, selling her house quietly and relocating to a different state. The neighborhood grapevine reported she'd moved closer to her adult children, though whether by choice or necessity, no one knew. Under David Chun's leadership, the HOA transformed. The revised bylaws were reasonable and focused on actual community maintenance rather than nitpicking aesthetics. Board meetings became collaborative rather than dictatorial. The neighborhood Facebook group shifted from being a platform for complaints and violations to sharing recommendations for contractors, organizing block parties, and celebrating community milestones. 6 months after the incident, I stood in the same spot in our driveway where I'd been that Saturday morning, watching Emma ride her bike. She was faster now, more confident, executing turns with ease, and even attempting small jumps off the curb. The training wheel removal seemed like years ago rather than months. Fast Mr. Patel walked by with his dog and waved. The Morrison kids were playing basketball in their driveway. Mrs. Johnson was gardening, her flower beds now a riot of colors that definitely wouldn't have been on Patricia's approved palette. Sarah came out to join me, sliding her arm around my waist. "She's doing great," she observed, watching Emma navigate a figure-8 pattern she'd been practicing. "She is," I agreed. "We all are." The incident with Patricia had been traumatic. There was no denying that. But it had also revealed the true character of our community, not in the perfectly maintained lawns and matching mailboxes, but in the neighbors who'd rushed to help, the families who'd shared their own stories, the collective decision that kindness mattered more than compliance. Emma rode past us, ringing her bell triumphantly. In that moment, with the afternoon sun warm on my face and my